How's it going, my dudes? Welcome back to another video. Let's get right into it. Let's take a look at the new characters, figure out who's good, who's food, and who's in between. And first up, we have Taylor, who is blessed with the divine power of Hercules. He will never stop his research. Okay, anyway, he's like some weapon fanatic, but anyway, let's get into his skills again. And let's see how he is different to how he was advertised. So, power impact attacks a target, dealing damage equal to 130% of attack, plus 5% damage increase per 10% HP loss. So if you are down to 1% HP, that would, I assume, be a 45% increase in damage. And I think that's pretty big, especially for a first skill, a skill that you can actually just keep using that way. And his passive, Hero's Wrath, nothing changes over here, gets an extra turn after killing an enemy, prevents killed enemies from being revived. And next, we have Soul Blast, dispels all buffs from one enemy, dealing damage equal to 270% attack, and suffers 30% true damage without being killed. So basically, he takes whatever damage that he did and he captures that 30% onto himself, and then he grants attack up and crit rate up for 3 turns after killing an enemy. So this skill definitely needs to kill something. And of course, as you can see on the left side, an attack up buff increases your attack by 40% and a crit rate buff increases your crit rate by 30%. He doesn't carry any leader buffs at all, but let's take a look at his stats. At max level, he has a respectable 1.242k HP. I'm not sure why I said it that way. 1242 attack with a rather low speed and an average HP range. I think 11k is pretty average. And let's see how some other players are building him. Most popular is going to be Thor. Yes, I assume that this is going to be pretty good for him. And of course, War Machine. I think these two are going to be staples. And it's funny that I'm not seeing any Hades set, but it is to be expected as well. So when you drop your S3, you want your HP to go lower. But you do have another 3 turns of critical buff and attack buff as well, which you may want to take full advantage of, which means that probably Hades could be essential if you really want to extend the utility of your buffs. Light above, this is no surprise. You want to be immune so that you do not get frozen, you do not get paralyzed, stunned, whatever. You want to be able to drop your S3 as soon as you can get a turn, which is super important for units like Taylor, who is so slow but so powerful. Now, Sword Avatara is not bad, especially if you want to dish some damage. Like, for example, if enemy hits you with a Long Mian, the Long Mian is not going to do a lot of damage to you, so you're going to be able to survive that, but your Sword Avatara is going to do a lot of damage and punish that one Long Mian. And I think it's very important to state that if you counter attack and you actually kill an enemy, you're actually going to trigger your passive that way, which means that you instantly steal a turn. So this is a very important way for you to capture more turns, especially if you're super slow, by using Sword Avatara. This is very important, especially for Monas out there. If you're using Mona as a farmer, here's a pro tip for you. Definitely put her on Sword Avatara. As long as you snipe an enemy with your first skill, you will instantly capture another turn and you can potentially throw an AoE and clear the entire wave that way. So for him to shine, especially in PvP, because I think in PvE he is kind of limited, you kind of want him to get his Soul Blast on, get his crit rate up, get his attack buff up as well, and pray that his counter attacks actually land you some extra turn steals, which I think is going to be his main selling point. So it's not so much about preventing revives. And honestly, as long as you get his Soul Blast up, you get your attack and your crit rate buffs, you can just leave him as a sitting duck, and as long as enemies touch him, he's going to counter attack. Of course, then you need to protect him a lot, and like I said before, Fabrice is going to be an excellent choice, especially if you're running a very slow Taylor. And of course, you can also use Suha, but there's going to be an overlap of an attack buff. So instead, maybe you can run something like a Catherine to prevent him from dying. These are just some tips for you guys. So all in all, I think he's actually pretty good. I've actually changed my mind about him. I think his passive is going to be excellent. I've seen what Mona can do, and I think he's going to be pretty remarkable that way. Next up, we have Kaylee. Possessing the divine power of Anuket, she firmly believes that dance has the power to transcend words. Okay, and then her skill 1 over here, Flowy Satin, anything change, deals damage to one enemy equals to 110% of attack and extends crit buff for 1 turn if a crit is triggered. Okay. Skill number 2, Crisscross, attacks an enemy 3 times, dealing damage equal to 55% of attack with a 50% chance of reducing AP by 15%. I believe this was on each hit, potentially up to 45% AP reduction. And inflict speed down debuff for 2 turns if a crit is triggered. This is pretty good. Take note that her cooldown is rather low as well. And finally, Dance of Deluge grants crit rate up for 2 turns and attacks all enemies 3 times, dealing damage equal to blah 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 with a 40% chance of inflicting freeze for 1 turn if a critical hit is triggered. Now, the thing that I really like about this skill is that it grants you crit rate buff for not just 1 turn but 2 turns, and this is so important because if you grant yourself crit rate up buff for 2 turns, on your second turn you would then be able to use Crisscross, and then you would then finally follow up with Flowy Satin, which extends your crit rate buff by 1 turn again which means that you have potentially unlimited crit buff as long as you go from your S3 to your S2 to your S1 and then your S1 again and back to your S3, perpetually be on your crit rate buff. So that means slightly different to how Taylor is made. Taylor is just having a crit rate buff for just basically 3 turns and then he's dead. After that, he's kind of useless because his S3 has a super long cooldown, but for this character over here, she has perpetually an additional 30% crit rate, which is super easy to build her. You can go rather heavy on crit damage and she can potentially do a little bit more damage, but of course, we have to take a look at her stats to figure out whether is she really just kitted as a pure debuffer or rather a pure disabler over here. And of course, not to forget, I have predicted this, she has a crit rate buff for 20%. Like I said before, crit rate leader buff is kind of garbage. It's not the same as having an actual crit buff like this, okay? So an actual crit buff, you can use it anywhere and you can activate it anywhere, but for a leader buff that grants you crit rate, you're essentially disabling the rest of your team from building more crit rate. If not, that's kind of like a waste. In general sense, having a speed lead is gonna be the best, followed by maybe HP lead. Well, it really depends on which state of the game you're at, but let's take a look at her stats at max level. She has an okay attack stat of 1.1k. I think she's just like 50 attack away from Lin Xiao, and we know how strong Lin Xiao is. I would make the claim that she's on the lower average of attack in terms of damage dealers, although she's not a damage dealer. But I've mentioned this before, I needed her speed to be 106 and she's 104. While that 2 speed may not make a lot of difference until the end game, right? The 2 speed difference is not going to matter that much, but it will matter a lot in the end game. So she's not going to take the first turn disable, but let's take a look at how other players are building her. Most people are running her Windwalker. That's a pretty clear cut for me. Definitely Windwalker. And next, Tyranny of Zeus. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend this because her AoE itself already grants you a good chance of landing a freeze. So I don't think you really need that extra 15% chance of stunning the target. It's not going to stack. Furthermore, Fafnir is super hard to farm. I wouldn't suggest farming Fafnir on a good day. So you probably not have many of these pieces anyway. But as for the 2-side relics, I think the Light Above and Apollo's Bow are pretty good choices. But I strongly believe that Sword Avatara is kinda useless for her. You can already stack your own crit rate. You do not need to counter attack to stack even more crit rate to perpetuate your crit rate buff. So unless you're just using it for pure DPS purposes, I think there are much better sets out there, such as the Light Above, Apollo's Bow, or even the Adamantine set. So I think she's pretty decent. She's kinda like Lin Xiao in a sense that you don't need a whole lot of crit rate on her. And of course, unlike Lin Xiao who only needs like 0% crit rate, Kaylee is going to need 70% crit rate, which is going to put her right below Lin Xiao in terms of DPS, and not just right below but far below, noting that her attack power is on a lower average of DPS classes. And she doesn't have like defense breaks and all that. So in terms of DPS, she's like kind of mixed between a debuffer as well. So she's either very useful or you can just find someone else who can do a better job than her. Regardless, I think she's still going to be super strong for new players, especially with that lower ceiling of her crit rate. She's going to be one of the more accessible high utility damage dealers. But let's move on to Clara. Finally, we have Clara. Yes, she is super strong, and as I expected, her kit is tremendously powerful. So she's probably the second strongest character in the game in terms of like tier listing. I would imagine that she will be placed very high up there, just right behind Una's as the top. But let's take a look at her skill 1. So Queen's Blessing attacks an enemy twice, dealing total damage equal to 110% of her attack. Heals 2 allies with the lowest HP for 5% of their max HP. So take note that the keyword here is their max HP, but I've actually proven this otherwise. It's actually her max HP. I'm not sure why I said their max HP. And 5% is a little bit lower than I expected, and like 10% is just way too OP, I would think. But you know, 5% is kind of like, what's the point, right? But it's still a heal, and the thing is, we just need a heal to proc. So even if it's just a 1% heal, that's good enough because of her second skill over here, which is basically a passive, Queen's Protection. Removes 2 debuffs when granting healing efficacy. I have confirmed that healing efficacy relates to healing, so as long as you heal someone, you will then affect all these extra stuff over here. So removes 2 debuffs when granting heal efficacy to any ally, or grants immunity for 1 extra turn if the target has no debuffs. At the same time, 120% of the overflow healing is converted into a shield for 2 turns. And the reason why this is so crazy is the fewer units that your team has, the stronger this passive even gets, because your first skill will be even more effective that way. So if you're down to like 3 or 4 characters, they're perpetually going to be on shield, they're perpetually going to be immune, and they're going to be focused on their heals as well. So that alone makes her rather dangerous, okay? I would say that she's quite dangerous. And Hymn of Life, so this is not Tons of Deluge, they actually screwed up the name over there. Boosts team-wide AP by 20%, and recovers HP by 35% of their HP. So I've tested as well, it is 35% of their HP. And on top of that, if your team has full HP, this 35% extra heal will then be translated into a 42% HP shield. That is so crazy. But honestly speaking, I was a little bit taken aback when her AP boost was just 20%. 20% is not enough. You would need to accommodate her by bringing along another AP booster as well in order for your lagging DPS to take a turn. So I think TA is going to be an excellent choice, especially in PvP. TA brings the speed lead and effectively steals 30% AP from all the enemies, which is then used to boost your team. So the synergy over there is perfect. And this is something that I did not expect, or her captain ability or her leader buff is increases all allies defense in the point wall by 40%. Yes, this is a lot. Okay, so 40% is crazy a lot, especially if you're running tanky teams. Like let's say you're running Renzi and you're running Dona, this character is going to be a perfect leader. She's just going to upkeep the heals like crazy, and I mean all these added up is going to be insane. But let's take a look at her max stats, and there's something that I'm very excited about. She has 106 speed. She's basically the fastest unit in the game right now, tied between Gabriel, Clara, and Unas. So she is the fastest character in the game with an AP boost. I know Unas has that as well, but Unas is a shimmer. She's basically many times easier to pull than a shimmer unit. And she has a crazy amount of HP as well, so that probably makes her super tanky, and as long as she can be really fast, really tanky, her kit is just perfect. So let's see what other people are running with her. I'm gonna imagine it's gonna be speed and immunity. That's definitely gonna be the first pick. It is not the first pick. Okay, so Windwalker and Master Growth set. I think honestly Master Growth set and like the defense sets, they are kinda useless. I mean, they're not really useless in terms of like giving you raw stats, but I feel like in these particular sets, what you really need are specific special effects. So like for example, Adamantine, you grant your whole team a shield that is super useful to have. Or like let's say Sword Avatara, you counter with a normal attack. I'm actually quite surprised I don't even see Sword Avatara used over here. I think she's gonna be pretty impressive with a Sword Avatara. She's gonna heal a lot of your teammates as long as they hit her and she counter attacks. But yeah, no surprise that Windwalker is the most popular set over here. She definitely needs a lot of speed. She is after all the fastest unit in the game right now with an AP boost. So that's it for this video guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What are your other opinions? Let me know. So I hope you enjoyed the video as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. Subscribe for more DISLYTE content. And this has been free to play by the way. And as always, I will see you in the next video.